Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. At midnight, ex-grid tech Trey Johnson found himself in his fuse room, flashlight clenched in his teeth, staring at power readings that made no sense. Something, or someone, was siphoning his electricity, quietly, professionally. What began as a high bill turned into a full-blown war over the wires. I never thought I'd be standing in my own fuse room at midnight, flashlight in my mouth, running amp clamps like it was a crime scene. But there I was, tired, confused, and pissed, staring at the numbers that didn't add up. Something was off, way off. And I don't mean left the lights on in the barn off. I mean someone's quietly milking my power like it's free-range goat's milk, off. Let me back up. My name's Trey Johnson. I'm 42, ex-power grid tech turned custom tool fabricator. About 4 months back, I moved out to a 4-acre property in East Texas I inherited from my late uncle. The place is a beast. 2-story farmhouse, separate workshop with reinforced concrete slab, some old stables, and a nice patch of pine forest hugging the back fence. Best of all, no HOA. That was a selling point carved into stone as far as I was concerned. The place needed love, sure, paint, wiring updates, pest control, country stuff. But the bones were solid, and Uncle Hank, bless the old bastard, had been a stickler for infrastructure. The electrical system alone was worth a small fortune. Sub-panel with triphasic input, smart surge protection, buried conduit, the works. That system could run a welding bay, CNC mill, and still have juice for a sauna, if I were the sauna type. So imagine my surprise when 2 months in, I opened my electric bill and nearly swallowed my coffee cup. My first month was reasonable, if a bit padded. But the second, 6 times higher. And the third, same story. Like I was lighting up a stadium for night games. I hadn't ramped up production. Hell, I'd barely touched half the tools in the shop. The biggest drain on the system was the fridge and a few fans. I called the electric company, spent 45 minutes on hold listening to some guy breathe through his teeth. Their tech finally said, "Meter's working fine, sir. Usage is legitimate. Probably HVAC. I don't even have central air, just a window unit in the bedroom and a floor fan in the shop. My AC's name is Fred, and he coughs before cooling." Still, I tried to shrug it off. Maybe I'd miscalculated. Maybe something was drawing more than it should. I started tracking usage like a hawk, shutting off the shop entirely when not in use, unplugging appliances, checking breakers. For a week, I lived like a paranoid prepper. And still, the numbers didn't budge. That's when I decided to open up the distribution panel. It was a Sunday. Hot, muggy, the kind of day mosquitoes drink DT for flavor. I killed the main breaker, opened the panel, and started checking for heat. Most circuits were cool to the touch, but one of them, a secondary line I didn't recognize from the original blueprint, was warm, not scalding, just suspicious. It was routed through conduit that vanished into the earth behind the workshop. Weird part, that conduit didn't show on my plans. Uncle Hank had detailed everything, right down to the depth of the grounding rods. This one, ghost wire. I walked the path with a measuring wheel and shovel, dug down near the fence line. What I found was a thick industrial-grade cable, insulated, armored, and newer than anything else around. It was routed cleanly underground toward the tree line that separated my property from a tidy little housing development called Whispering Pines. Now, I'd seen the place in passing. Gated community, identical houses with porches like magazine ads. Looked like a coloring book for people who didn't like to color outside the lines. I'd waved to a few dog walkers when driving past, got nothing but suspicious nods in return, figured they kept to themselves, and that suited me just fine. But now I was standing over a trench that said otherwise. This cable didn't belong, and it sure as hell didn't connect to any of my equipment. That meant someone had tapped in, professionally, quietly, and without a damn word to me. I stood there in the Texas sun, sweat soaking through my shirt, heart thudding like I'd just caught a snake under the porch. My first thought was, someone's running a line off my grid. My second, they picked the wrong damn house. So I did what any stubborn Texan would do. I took photos, marked GPS points, resealed the ground, and headed inside. If someone wanted to steal power, they better pray they didn't do it to an ex-electrician with free time, a sharp memory, and zero tolerance for freeloaders. The hunt had just begun. The next morning, I woke up early, earlier than usual. That kind of early when the sky is still deciding what color to be and even the crickets haven't punched out yet. I didn't sleep much. My brain kept tracing that buried cable like it was a murder scene. I knew what I saw yesterday wasn't normal. I knew the route it took. What I didn't know was how far the rabbit hole went, and who the hell thought it was a good idea to steal power from someone who used to design power grids for a living. By 7 a.m., I was back outside with a thermos of burnt coffee and an old roll of surveyor's tape. I started mapping out the trench line more carefully this time, matching it against the electrical blueprint my uncle left. It wasn't just undocumented. It was deliberately hidden. The conduit ran straight from my panel, ducked below the cedar fencing, and kept going under the shared access road that bordered Whispering Pines. That's when I made the call to Tommy. Tommy T. Wire Wilkinson and I go back 20 years. He was the guy you called when the job needed doing quiet, clean, and to code. He'd left the company years ago to run private inspections and made decent money consulting for insurance adjusters. He owed me one, a big one, something about a transformer fire and an ex-wife's alibi. When Tommy pulled up an hour later in his rusted F-150, he didn't ask many questions, just took a swig from his Mountain Dew, lit a cigarette, and said, "Show me where to dig." We ran the gear radar system first, a small cart with a sensor dome dragging it slowly along the fence line and toward the woods. The screen started pinging immediately. Buried metallic signature, uniform depth, shielded cable, fresh soil, not amateur work. This was contractor-grade installation. Tommy gave me a long look and whistled. Whoever did this wasn't guessing. That's Schedule 80 conduit, double insulated. Someone paid real money to bury this line. We traced it across the easement, then under a utility alley that led, surprise, surprise, right into the maintenance shed at the edge of Whispering Pines. From the outside, it looked like a landscaping shack, but with the ground-penetrating radar and Tommy's probes, we could tell there was a full sub-panel inside, and it was hot. That's when it stopped being just a mystery and started smelling like criminal activity. We took pictures of everything: readings, depth measurements, soil disturbance markers, thermal imagery. We even pulled a current clamp on the exposed section and watched a steady 7.3 kilowatt draw, consistent, stable, and absolutely not part of my usage pattern. Tommy looked at me and said, "You're bleeding about $100 a week through this line. Minimum." I didn't say much. I just stared at the fence between my yard and that HOA's precious row of identical mailboxes. Someone in that cookie-cutter utopia thought they could tap a silent line and no one would ever notice. But they made two mistakes. They picked a guy who notices, and they did it without covering their tracks. The next step was formal. I typed up a notice of property violation, attached a signed report from Tommy, photos, timestamps, usage deltas, and walked it over to the Whispering Pines HOA office in person. Their clubhouse sat behind iron gates and faux colonial columns, like some rejected southern mansion with Wi-Fi. I handed the envelope to a receptionist who looked like she'd been trained to blink slowly rather than answer questions. "Please forward this to your HOA president," I said. "It concerns an illegal power draw from my property." She looked down at the envelope like it was a dead bird. "Is this about the new landscaping lights?" I raised an eyebrow. "It's about theft. Electricity. Federal offense, last time I checked." She pursed her lips. "I'll make sure Mrs. Maddox receives it." Karen Maddox. The name rang in my ears like a broken smoke alarm. I'd seen her once, power walking down the road in a tennis visor, barking into a Bluetooth headset about community standards. That kind of woman. I hadn't realized she was the queen of the cul-de-sac. It made sense now. The arrogance, the silence, the professional job on the cabling. She had connections, and she clearly thought no one would push back. I walked away, feeling the heat on my neck, and not just from the Texas sun. A response came that evening, hand-delivered in a branded Whispering Pines envelope. Inside was a single piece of glossy stationery, elegantly printed. "Mr. Johnson, if you believe a cable on your property impacts our infrastructure, you are welcome to pursue legal channels. The HOA does not recognize any shared liability in this matter. Regards, Karen Maddox, President." No apology. No denial. No explanation. Just veiled mockery in cursive font. I crumpled the letter and tossed it on the workbench. Then I turned to my fuse box, unscrewed the faceplate, and started wiring in flow meters and redundant breakers. If they wanted to play games with current, fine. But I was done asking questions. The lights went out just after 9. 1 second I was grinding steel in the workshop, sparks flying like fireflies. And the next, silence. Everything snapped off at once. Grinder, fans, overhead LEDs. The hum of the transformer cut mid-breath. It wasn't a breaker trip. It felt coordinated, surgical. I stood there in the dark, hands still on the metal, the blade half embedded in the frame I was fabricating. It was a moment before I even moved. Then I checked the main panel. Dead. Checked the sub-panel. Same. Walked the length of the property, flashlight in hand, to the big emergency cutoff by the service post. That's when I saw it. The entire breaker box was open. The lock had been snapped clean off. The lever for the main shutoff was in the kill position, but not gently pulled. Yanked so hard the metal casing bent. Worse, the armored conduit I'd inspected a few days earlier had been slashed. Someone came onto my property and physically tore out part of the line. A whole section of the buried cable had been dug up, maybe 20 feet, and cut out clean. I stood there staring at the exposed earth and severed ends like I was looking at a corpse. It was an act of war. I walked back toward the house, grabbed my phone, and called the sheriff's department. Gave a short, flat report. Suspected vandalism. Possible theft. Told them about the damaged box, the missing cable, the previous correspondence with Whispering Pines. The deputy on the other end, a guy named Lambert, promised to send someone out in the morning. "Can't do much tonight," he said. "Just take pictures and don't touch anything." Don't touch anything. Right, because clearly I'm the one on trial here. By midnight, I'd installed floodlights powered by my generator and laid down makeshift perimeter alarms with motion detectors from the barn. I wasn't going to get caught off guard again. I had no proof, not yet, but I knew in my gut this wasn't random vandalism. This was a cleanup job. A hit. Someone realized I'd found their feeding tube and decided to rip it out before the lawyers came knocking. Problem was, they didn't realize I wasn't just angry, I was recording. The day before, anticipating pushback, I'd installed a basic monitoring system. Nothing fancy, just a couple of clamp-on power meters and current sensors feeding into a Raspberry Pi that logged voltage differentials in real time. They were wired into multiple points along my feed, including the line leading to that mysterious underground cable. Sure, someone tore the hardware out, but the logs? They were cloud-synced. When I checked the system that night, I found something beautiful. Right around 8:56 p.m., the load on Phase C spiked, then flatlined. I had a clean timestamp of when the sabotage happened. 30 seconds later, the flow from my distribution panel dropped by nearly 7 kilowatts. That meant they'd been drawing current right up until the moment they tore it out. I couldn't stop smiling. The next morning, Deputy Lambert showed up in a dusty cruiser with the tired face of a man who'd rather be chasing speeders than sorting property line drama. He was polite, asked the right questions, took pictures of the scene, wrote down names. When I mentioned the Whispering Pines HOA and Karen Maddox, his eyebrows lifted. "Oh, her. Yeah. You know her?" He made a noise like someone trying not to laugh. "Let's just say she calls more than she should. Had a lady arrested last year for putting a trampoline too close to a property line. She's active. Thinks she'd sabotage a neighbor's power." He tilted his head. "She'd have someone else do it. That's more her speed." I handed him a USB with the power logs, plus a full write-up of what Tommy and I found the day before. Lambert promised to pass it to the Property Crimes Division, but he was honest. It'll be hard to pin this without direct evidence. No prints, no camera footage. Not yet. Well, you might want to start setting traps. I nodded slowly. That's exactly what I intended. Over the next 48 hours, I turned my property into a digital fortress. I installed 8 motion-activated trail cams, the kind used for night hunting. Each pointed toward a likely access route, the tree line, the gate, the drainage path behind the barn. Then I mounted 3 directional microphones near the utility area with sound triggers tuned for tools or digging. But the real trick, I ordered a new set of smart flow sensors, high-resolution industrial grade. They weren't just going to log usage, they'd give me identity. By triangulating harmonic fingerprints, subtle fluctuations in load patterns, I'd be able to tell exactly what kind of equipment was being powered, even if I couldn't see it. If they ever tapped in again, I'd know what they were running. Streetlights, gates, water pumps. Hell, if they used a microwave, I'd know what brand. And I wasn't going to warn anyone. This time, they'd think they were being clever. This time, I'd be watching. For the next 3 weeks, my property ran quiet. Too quiet. Not a single flicker, not a single footprint. The motion cams caught deer, a couple of raccoons, and one guy on a mountain bike who clearly didn't realize he'd strayed onto land protected by someone who used to teach industrial sabotage to Army engineers. But there were no more incursions. No more sabotage. Just silence. That's when I knew something was happening. See, when guilty people go quiet, they're either plotting or praying. And folks like Karen Maddox don't pray. They posture, which meant someone in Whispering Pines was doing damage control, trying to reroute, reframe, maybe even erase evidence before it could bite them back. But what they didn't know was that I never stopped collecting. The flow sensors I'd installed weren't passive anymore. They were active, syncing to a dedicated server on a cellular uplink far away from my home network. Each panel was tracking electrical harmonics, current variances, and surge patterns every 5 seconds. I'd set up alerts to ping me if anything beyond baseline residential behavior popped up. And 3 nights ago, it did. At exactly 10:04 p.m., Phase A spiked, not a rolling surge, a sharp, unmistakable jump. 7.1 kilowatts sustained for 20 minutes. The exact draw we'd recorded from the now severed mystery cable. But this time, the current wasn't exiting from the same conduit. It was coming through a secondary buried path, one I hadn't noticed before, running parallel to the first, only deeper. I stared at the data in disbelief. They hadn't stopped stealing. They'd just rerouted. The bastards had a backup line. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, I'd laid out a plan like I was prepping for a Black Ops mission. I traced the suspected line using magnetometer sweeps, sonar pings, and, when that wasn't enough, I rented a mini excavator and dug a precision trench along the suspected curve. It took 12 hours, but I found it. A newer conduit, shinier, tighter, buried damn near 3 feet down and routed around the fence like it was avoiding detection. Whoever installed it knew what they were doing, and whoever paid for it had access to someone with utility-level knowledge. I followed the path, inch by inch, right up to a maintenance vault just outside Whispering Pines. I already knew what I'd find, but I needed the proof. So I called in a favor from an old buddy who did city inspections. He brought his badge, his meter, and his nerves of steel. 30 minutes in, we confirmed it. The backup line was live, drawing power from my substation and feeding a series of low-voltage circuits running back toward the HOA. Street lamps, garden irrigation systems, gate controls, possibly more. They'd created a redundant parasitic circuit through my property. The kicker, I caught one of their engineers in the act. 2 nights later, one of the motion sensors pinged at 1:46 a.m. I pulled up the live feed and saw a white Ford utility van parked by the rear maintenance gate of Whispering Pines. A guy in reflective coveralls, no visible company logo, opened a control panel mounted right over the zone where the buried line entered HOA territory. He worked quickly, confidently, adjusted something, checked his tablet, then climbed back into his van and drove off like it was just another Tuesday night job. I didn't even blink, just hit record. By morning, I had a full sequence: vehicle, timestamp, partial plate, technician's face, and synchronized flow data showing a direct correlation between his work and a voltage shift on my grid. That same afternoon, I compiled everything, every log, every chart, every screenshot. I formatted it into a formal technical report, 56 pages long, with signatures from 2 certified electricians, 3 weeks of harmonic sampling data, and an annotated map of both illegal lines. I cross-checked timestamps with Whispering Pines HOA's known lighting schedules. Everything matched. The parasites had names now. And I wasn't done. I walked the report into the county energy inspector's office myself. The lady at the desk raised an eyebrow when she saw the cover page. "This about Whispering Pines." "Among others," I said, sliding it across the counter. By the time I left, she was already dialing internal affairs. But before I made it home, I had one more stop to make. I wrote a letter, short, cold, and loaded. I enclosed the executive summary of the report, 2 damning photos and a simple offer: admit guilt, pay restitution, or face criminal and civil charges for theft, property damage, trespassing, infrastructure sabotage, and regulatory violations. I dropped it in the HOA's lockbox at their clubhouse, marked in bold red ink. Final warning, power theft report enclosed. That night, for the first time in a month, I left my lights on. Let them burn. I expected silence. Instead, I got a letter. 2 days after dropping my evidence at the Whispering Pines clubhouse, I received a thick envelope delivered by a courier in khakis and a HOA logo windbreaker. I didn't even offer him a nod, just took the package and shut the door before the poor kid could rehearse whatever script Karen had written. Inside was a notarized notice titled Formal Complaint of Disruption of Community Utilities. It accused me of unauthorized tampering with shared infrastructure, malicious interference with community-critical electrical flows, and, unbelievably, deliberate endangerment of public safety. The phrasing was slick, obviously written by someone with a background in law, or at least with access to a HOA template site for psychotic suburban tyrants. At the bottom, in looping script, was Karen Maddox's signature. She even included a list of grievances filed by her constituents, claiming that I'd caused flickering porch lights, irregular sprinkler cycles, and, my favorite, emotional distress due to uncertainty about nighttime security lighting. I laughed so hard I almost dislocated a rib. That same evening, I saw the first city vehicle roll up to my property. A white pickup marked County Code Enforcement pulled off the road and parked near the front gate. A man in khaki slacks and a tucked-in polo stepped out with a clipboard and a look on his face like he expected me to be holding a shovel and a confession. "You Trey Johnson?" "That's me," I said, stepping off the porch with a cold beer in hand. "Let me guess. Whispering Pines called in the cavalry?" He cleared his throat. "We received a complaint of unpermitted electrical routing and unsafe substation modifications. I'm here to perform an inspection." I nodded calmly. "Sure. You want the paperwork now or after the tour?" His brow furrowed. I handed him a binder, my own. Inside, certified schematics, photos, electrical permits filed under my name, documentation of all modifications done since I inherited the property, and copies of the energy audit I'd submitted to the county 2 years earlier. All signed, all sealed. The inspector took one look, flipped a few pages, and let out a sigh like someone forced to sit through a kindergarten play when he'd come for a trial. We walked the site anyway. I let him examine every junction, every panel, every buried line. He confirmed everything on my end was legal, professionally installed, and 100% compliant with state electrical codes. But it didn't stop there. He then mentioned a second complaint, filed that morning, accusing me of digging on county easements and diverting resources intended for collective benefit. I asked if the complaint came with evidence. He showed me a blurry photo of the conduit trench I'd dug on my own land, with my own rented backhoe, and the caption, "Illegal excavation threatening HOA aesthetics." I had to walk away before I said something that would bring the sheriff back. Out. It was clear now. Karen wasn't just playing defense. She was launching a smear campaign, and I wasn't her only target. That night, an old guy I barely knew knocked on my door. Larry Davenport. Lived 2 lots over, close enough to see my lights, but far enough to pretend we were just polite strangers. I'd seen him mowing, fixing a porch railing, feeding stray cats. "Mind if I come in?" he asked, looking uneasy. I nodded, and we sat on the porch, beer in hand, breeze stirring the pines. "I heard what happened," he said. "Saw the trucks. Listen, I think they're stealing from me, too." I froze. Larry explained that his electric bill had doubled since spring. He thought it was his old well pump or a busted hot water heater, but after I'd started digging, he got curious and called in a buddy with an ammeter. They found an unexplained draw coming from a line running away from his house toward Whispering Pines. We walked to his breaker box that night with a clamp meter. Sure enough, he had a phantom circuit, just like I did. Same amperage draw, same directional flow. They'd built another tap. He wasn't alone. Within the week, 2 other neighbors showed up. One of them, a single mom who thought she'd just been overusing the dryer. All of them had the same symptoms: absurdly high usage, lines going in the wrong direction, and HOA brush crews conveniently working near the fence line a few months earlier. We connected the dots and found the full picture. A multi-point siphoning system built in phases, disguised as maintenance or landscaping, using HOA funds to engineer a theft ring that leached off adjacent properties. A power vampire farm hidden in plain sight. My lawyer, Janine Mercado, nearly dropped her coffee when I told her. "You're not dealing with a nuisance," she said. "You're looking at conspiracy, multiple counts of theft, infrastructure tampering, and wire fraud. We're not filing 1 suit. We're filing 4. And that HOA, it's going to burn." The pressure built fast. News of the theft started to trickle out through town. A local reporter called me for comment. I kept it polite. "I'm just trying to protect what's mine," I said. "If the law agrees, that's good enough for me." But Karen, she doubled down. I got a notice taped to my gate the next morning. Whispering Pines was filing a counterclaim for $500,000 alleging reputational harm, power disruption sabotage, and deliberate psychological warfare against a peaceful community. Psychological warfare. From the guy who installed his own fuse box. The same day, someone dumped a load of grass clippings across my driveway entrance. Petty, pathetic. And the last straw. I called Janine. "Let's go scorched earth." She didn't hesitate. "I'll file everything by Friday. And Trey, this is going to get ugly, but it's also going to get expensive. For them." Friday morning didn't come quietly. It came with a loud knock, a legal courier at my gate, and a folder thick enough to stun an ox. Whispering Pines had officially filed their counterclaim. My name sat at the top of the paperwork like a bounty target. Karen wasn't just trying to defend herself. She was trying to obliterate me. The filing alleged malicious interference with HOA operations, unlawful tampering with community infrastructure, and emotional damages on behalf of no fewer than 11 households. I read it all while sipping coffee in my workshop, boots on the table, generator humming in the background. By the time I hit page 20, I wasn't even angry. I was impressed. Karen had managed to turn theft, sabotage, and trespassing into her being the victim. Her lawyers framed me like I was an unhinged militia member with a garage full of explosives and a grudge against landscaping. I half expected them to mention terroristic intent because I cut my own hedges without HOA approval. Meanwhile, Janine filed our suit with the county clerk. 4 plaintiffs, myself, Larry, a retired vet named Benji, and Miss Ortiz, the single mom with the phantom power line. Together, we were asking for $80,000 in damages, plus triple restitution under Texas utility theft law. Our filing included everything: diagrams, flow logs, expert affidavits, timestamps, and thermal scans. Janine had packaged the entire thing into a digital warhead. She even color-coded the lines for the judge. Red meant theft. Karen's legal team didn't take long to respond. Within days, we were scheduled for a preliminary injunction hearing. But before that could happen, I got a visitor I didn't expect. A black SUV pulled into my drive just past dusk. Government plates. Out stepped a man in a Navy windbreaker with a Department of Energy badge clipped to his belt. Behind him was another man, this one from the Public Utility Commission of Texas. They introduced themselves, asked to speak inside. I led them to the workshop. Turns out the county inspector I visited weeks ago, she'd flagged my report and forwarded it upstream. The scale of the siphoning and the sophistication of the buried infrastructure had raised red flags at the state level. What we'd uncovered wasn't just a neighborhood issue. It had the hallmarks of a coordinated operation using publicly subsidized HOA funds to steal private utility service across jurisdictional lines. The DOE guy walked through my logs, flipped through my reports, and said, "If this is what it looks like, someone's going to jail." I just nodded. The hearing was set for Monday. When I arrived at the courthouse, Karen was already there, flanked by 2 attorneys and wearing a white blouse so stiff it looked like it had been ironed by Satan himself. She offered me a brittle smile as I passed, like I was a waiter she'd once fired. Inside, Janine did her job like a machine. She laid out the theft clearly, calmly, without theatrics. She played footage of the utility van engineer rerouting current. She handed over sworn affidavits. She even provided a letter from the energy company confirming the volume of unmetered draw originating from my substation. Karen's team tried to play defense. They argued the lines were pre-existing infrastructure maintained by the HOA, that I had mistakenly tapped into their system. The judge frowned at that and asked one question: "Do you have any records of this infrastructure on your permits?" They did not. The judge ruled for an emergency injunction. Effective immediately, all connections between Whispering Pines and my electrical systems were to be severed. A state-certified inspector would oversee the disconnection, and a forensic audit of the HOA's energy usage would begin the following week. Karen exploded in the hallway. "You think this is over?" she hissed as I walked by. I stopped, looked her in the eye. "No, I think it's starting." By the next morning, my place was crawling with official vehicles, inspectors, auditors, reporters. The HOA's maintenance shed was sealed with yellow tape. My neighbor Larry stood on his porch with a mug of coffee and yelled, "Guess someone's lights are about to go out." It felt like momentum had finally shifted. But what none of us realized was that Karen still had one play left. That same night, I heard a noise, a high, whirring tone. I rushed out to the service panel and saw a drone hovering near the fence line, scanning the utility boxes with a blinking green camera. I aimed a spotlight at it, and it zipped off toward Whispering Pines like a startled bat. They weren't just fighting in court anymore. They were watching me. The ceasefire lasted exactly 2 days. Then all hell broke loose. It started with a storm. Not a metaphor, a real Texas summer storm that rolled in like a vengeful god. Thunder that cracked like artillery, rain that came sideways, lightning strikes so close the ground buzzed. My power grid thankfully held strong, insulated, grounded, overbuilt. But Whispering Pines, not so much. Their lights blinked, gates jammed, irrigation stopped. Rumor had it one of their underground transformers shorted and caught fire. The emergency generator kicked in for about 10 minutes before choking out. And then, just after 2 in the morning, their entire perimeter went black, which would have been their problem if they hadn't decided to make it mine. I was in bed when my perimeter sensors tripped. First one, then another. Motion along the east fence, then the north gate, then the workshop. I grabbed my boots, flashlight, and sidearm, stepped out into the soaked yard. 3 men in ponchos stood near my transformer panel, one with bolt cutters, the others huddled around something that looked suspiciously like a portable junction box. My junction box. I shouted. They bolted. I chased them halfway to the tree line before they dove into a running pickup with no plates and peeled off, fishtailing into the wet gravel road. I stood there, soaked, panting, staring at the cable they'd left behind. A partially unspooled industrial tap line with clamps still attached. They'd tried to reconnect. The next day, I handed the evidence over to the sheriff's office, along with fresh trail cam footage showing faces, timestamps, and toolkits. Deputy Lambert took one look and said, "Yeah, this just turned criminal in a whole new direction." That same afternoon, the state auditor released a preliminary report. Whispering Pines HOA had failed to disclose over $120,000 in infrastructure, maintenance costs. None of it was on the books. None of it had gone through public bid. Most of it had been paid to shell companies tied to a single contractor, Mark W. Maddox, Karen's cousin. The moment that went public, the walls started crumbling. 2 HOA board members resigned that night. One of them, a middle-aged guy named Ron with a handlebar mustache and a bad poker face, called me personally. He was scared, claimed he'd been told the lines were legal, claimed Karen assured them it was all covered by easements. "Did you see the lines, Ron?" I asked. "No," he whispered. "She said it was better we didn't." I gave his statement to Janine. She had it notarized and added it to our lawsuit. By then, the media had picked up the story. First local radio, then a Dallas affiliate, then a segment on regional news titled Power Games, How One Texas HOA Crossed the Line. My name was all over it. So was Karen's. But while I stood next to Larry on our dirt road smiling like a man who just won a demolition derby, Karen was caught on video screaming at a cameraman and threatening to call the governor. It was glorious. But we weren't done yet. The forensic audit revealed that at least 4 other properties along the HOA boundary showed signs of unauthorized power draw. All of them belonged to elderly couples or absentee landlords, easy targets. The state called it a deliberate and systemic exploitation of adjacent properties under the guise of communal development. That phrase alone was enough for the DA to get involved. Karen was subpoenaed. And then, just when I thought the script had peaked, the final twist hit. One of the disbarred contractors came forward, anonymously at first. Through his lawyer, he handed over blueprints, dated diagrams, email chains, even a payment ledger showing exactly how the siphon network had been built. Lot by lot, paid for with HOA dues, disguised as landscaping and lighting improvements. The name on the approval forms? Karen Maddox. She'd signed everything. The DA moved fast. Within 48 hours, a warrant was issued for Karen's arrest on charges including utility theft, conspiracy to commit fraud, destruction of private property, and tampering with evidence. She was picked up outside her Pilates studio in full athletic wear, caught mid-sip of a $7 green juice. I didn't dance when I heard the news, but I might have bought myself a celebratory socket wrench set. Karen's mugshot hit the news that evening. Blonde hair slicked with sweat, jaw clenched in a way that screamed, "I blame everyone but myself." Below the photo, a ticker listed her charges: 5 felonies, 3 misdemeanors, and a bond she couldn't post in time to make her HOA board meeting. Not that the board still existed. By that point, every remaining member had resigned or taken personal leave. Whispering Pines had no leadership, no power grid, and no legal footing. The association was collapsing like a tent in a hailstorm. I should have felt triumphant. And maybe I did. A little. But mostly, I just felt done. In the weeks that followed, things moved fast. The court ruled in our favor on all civil counts. Larry, Benji, Miss Ortiz, and I each received $20,000 in damages, plus another lump sum when the judge granted triple punitive penalties under the state's utility fraud laws. Janine practically skipped out of the courtroom with the check in her hand. HOA insurance tried to appeal, but the audit had killed any chance of reversal. Whispering Pines was hit with over $750,000 in fines and restitution. Their remaining funds were frozen. A receiver was appointed to oversee dissolution. And Karen, 8 years in prison, no parole for the first 3. When the judge read the sentence, she tried to claim mental duress, said she was under pressure to maintain community standards. The courtroom laughed. Even the bailiff cracked a grin. The DA didn't. He just showed the court a printed email where Karen called me a backwoods redneck with too many volts and not enough sense. "Yeah," I said outside the courthouse. "I've got enough volts now to power my new warehouse." Because that's what I did with the money. The first thing I built was a fence. Not a picket one. A proper perimeter barrier with security lighting, cameras, warning signs, and buried detection lines. No more uninvited guests. No more stolen power. Just a clean line between my land and the world that thought it could dip its wires into mine. The second thing, a distribution center. I took the leftover funds, pooled some savings, and opened a regional depot for small-scale contractors, electricians, welders, fabricators, folks like me, folks who know the value of hard work and the cost of theft. We called it Breaker's Edge. Larry came on as shop foreman. Miss Ortiz handles the books part-time. Benji mostly sits out back and plays checkers with the new hires, grinning like he never thought retirement could be this entertaining. Sometimes I still catch sight of Whispering Pines through the trees. The houses are still there, but the gates don't work. The streetlights are dark. The yard's overgrown. Most of the properties are in foreclosure or litigation limbo. Nobody wants to buy into a dead HOA. It's a ghost town with granite countertops. I put up a sign at my north fence line. Bright red letters, clean as a warning flare. Private power grid. Trespassers will be charged. Literally. Sometimes people take photos of it. Tourists mostly. Urban explorers. One guy from a tech blog did a whole write-up titled "The Day the Suburbs Lost to a Texan with a Toolkit." I printed it out and framed it in the shop bathroom. And me? I sleep well now. The lights stay on, the meters run true, and every wire on my land goes where I say it goes. Because this isn't just property, it's a closed circuit. And I'm the breaker.